Shalom and welcome to Jerusalem Studio. Israel's main coastline is on its west facing the Mediterranean. Its navy's main adversary used to be Egypt, and in the 4 decades of peace between Cairo and Jerusalem, maritime challenges emanated chiefly from Syria, Lebanon, and the Gaza Strip, especially since the sea turned out to offer an abundance of energy resources. Thus, the Israeli Navy's main fleet is still operating out of the ports of Haifa and Ashdod, yet with Iran and its proxies threatening shipping and shore-based targets in the Persian Gulf, Bab-el-Mandeb and Red Sea areas, the naval vessels out of the southern Israeli city of Eilat and their cooperation with Air Force and intelligence assets, as well as American and regional partners, have also been tasked with a major responsibility. Israel now has to balance its naval activities between micro versions of the Sixth Fleet in the west and the Fifth Fleet in the south, which are joined by Egypt's Suez Canal, which it is able to utilize for transit. Joining us to discuss Israel between two maritime fronts is Colonel retired Dr. Eran Lerman, who's the co-host of TV7 Middle East Review, Powers in Play panelist, and the vice president of the Jerusalem Institute for Strategy and Security. Thank you for joining us, Colonel.
Thank you.
Also joining us from northern Israel is Rear Admiral, retired Professor Shaul Chorev, who is the head of Maritime Policy and Strategy Research Center at Haifa University. Thank you for joining us as well, Admiral.
Thank you.
Also joining us here in the studio is our TV7 editor-at-large and host of Watchmen Talk, Powers in Play, and so much more, Mr. Amir Oren. Well, Amir, when we're talking about Israel, obviously between the two seas, it's challenged, considering the fact that its assets within the maritime domain are limited. Nevertheless, the vast economic benefits in the Mediterranean and the various challenges accumulating these days in various shipping lanes, as mentioned, and elsewhere, are challenging Israel somewhat. To what degree can you provide us some insight to better clarify this complexity?
So, as you know, Jonathan, and as our two guests who each has some British background know, when Britannia ruled the waves, the Royal Navy was the senior service. In Israel, it was not that way. The Air Force and the ground forces took center stage. And one, in looking back, has to admire the foresight of the founding fathers of Israel, especially David Ben-Gurion, who insisted on opening the route to the Far East by establishing the port of Eilat. And then, a few years after Israel was founded, to set up a small naval base at Eilat, which then took additional responsibilities. Now, with the peace in Egypt and Jordan, which makes the Red Sea an Egyptian, Israeli, Jordanian, Saudi lake, Israel, of course, sees its main existential threat coming from Iran. But the maritime front there has more conventional threats as well, especially with the Houthis cooperating with Iran, threatening navigation, and the Iranians retaliating or initiating strikes against not only Israeli vessels, but also those partly owned by part Israelis. Because they take the liberty to define what they consider legitimate targets. So if you take that along with the Navy's added responsibilities in protecting the energy assets in the Mediterranean, the Navy has a full plate to chew into.
Indeed. From a policy perspective, Dr. Lerman, I'd like to ask you, what is the current outlook from Jerusalem vis-a-vis the various maritime fronts at this stage, considering the various complexities at hand?
Well, there are actually two very different arenas for the time being, although the Iranians are trying to gain a presence also in the Eastern Mediterranean via their Syrian connection, not very successfully so far. But in the Eastern Mediterranean, Israel is closely cooperating with the American Fifth Fleet as well as its strategic partners in recent years, in the last decade or so, namely Greece and Cyprus, with their own strategic relationship with Egypt. It basically creates an alignment of forces that can protect interests in the Eastern Mediterranean. The challenge there, of course, has been, things are changing, but it has been the bid for dominance by Erdogan's Turkey. By now, the Turks are courting both Israel and Egypt. Things have shifted quite dramatically for various reasons. But still, the Eastern Mediterranean is an arena where we have significant European partners and as well as the United States, which was embodied in the recent Nobel Diner annual exercise in late March in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Red Sea and beyond is a new arena of cooperation, because this is the domain on the American side of the U.S. Central Command, which for years would not touch Israel, with a 10-foot pole because of its relationships and duties towards the key Gulf Arab countries. Of course, all of this has changed very dramatically since the Abraham Accords, has begun to change even earlier. And today we are looking essentially not just at Egypt and Jordan, as Amir mentioned, but also at the UAE as a strategic partner under the joint, and now Israel is in CENTCOM, so we are all under the aegis or under the wing of an American command, which definitely seeks to build up not only exercises and peacetime cooperation, but also joint plans for emergencies. All of this adds up to a very new, dramatically potential breakthrough in terms of Israel's presence, not only in the Red Sea, but even beyond, in the northern Arabian Gulf.
Admiral, Professor Chorev, I'd like to hear your perspective on this, and also to what degree the latest developments which the Israeli Navy has undergone, including the assumption or acquisition of a number of frigates of the Sal 6 class into its ranks, considering the fact that overt assets today in the maritime domain are not necessarily considered the most efficient at a time when they could be regarded as sitting ducks in some contexts. And you, as the former commander also of the submarine fleet, do you see the transition potentially once again to submarine power as a strategic tool for advancing Israel's interests maybe a better course of action?
I would like to start and to evaluate what happened during the, let's say, 75 years of Israel independence. And as Amir mentioned, it was right, or it is right, that the lion's share of the budget was not directed toward the Israeli Navy. However, if you evaluate what happened in 56, 67, the main reason, or the casus belli for the 56 war, Kadesh or Sinai, and the 67 was the blockade of the Tiran Strait. So when we are looking at the events, I think that we should consider also from geostrategic point of view, where is Israel located? And I think that you mentioned that it's two fronts. I was invited by Italian to participate in a symposium, and they asked me how you consider Israel as a Middle Ocean state. I ask them, where is the ocean? But they say, look, you and Egypt are the only one in the Mediterranean that they share the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. And I think that in the Mediterranean, the Israeli Navy got what we call constabulary mission currently. What does it mean, constabulary mission? A navy or state which has a coast guard should do this policing of securing the exclusive economic zone with the energy infrastructure that we have, with desalination facility, power plant, and all such things. So in the Mediterranean, I think that the Israeli Navy is focused on the threats that are coming from Hezbollah, from other terrorist organizations, and they have the mission to secure our infrastructure in this region. The more complex arena is the Red Sea. And I would like to mention that even though in the Yom Kippur War, on the operational level, the Israeli Navy achieved a big success in the combat against the Syrian Navy, in the Egyptian Navy, and also in the Suez Strait, also against Egypt. But speaking from strategic point of view, the Egyptian put a blockade on Israeli shipping and the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And when it came to negotiation, Israeli released the blockade on the 5th of the 3rd Army in order to get a freedom of navigation through Bab-el-Mandeb. So in the Yom Kippur War, which was considered to be in the operational level a big success for the Israeli Navy, if you consider it from a strategic Navy level, they failed to have a freedom of navigation through the Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. And I think that we should consider it, and I serve in 78, 79 as a squadron commander of missile boat, securing freedom of navigation and line of communication in the Red Sea, and this arena is very complicated.
Indeed, which is indeed vital also for Israel's southern commercial, obviously, but also beyond that. Yeah.
You are right. If you're looking at what is happening from an economic point of view, the center of gravity is moving from Europe to Southeast Asia through the Indian Ocean. And currently, 25% of Israel import is going to the Indian Ocean through Bab-el-Mandeb Strait. So I think that the Israeli Navy now have a challenge to see in such a complicated arena, not is limited only to the Red Sea, but also to the Gulf of Aden and the Indian Ocean, which the Iranian found that it's an area that it's out of access of the Israeli Navy, how to secure line of communication in this area. And I think that, as Iran mentioned, the good idea that we have a good cooperation with the Fifth Fleet. And after Abraham Accord, it considered to be very trivial. But participating in what was called the shadow war against the Iranian tankers bringing oil to Syria, I think that from strategic point of view, we failed to consider what will be the result. And from 2019 till 2023, 6 Israeli-related commercial ships were hit by Iranian, whether by limpet mines or by UAVs. So in the Mediterranean, I think that the situation is that the Israeli Navy have a mission. I have some, let's say, reservation if we need such a big frigate like the SAR 6 class boat to maintain this mission, but I think that the Israeli Navy is conducting this mission successfully. You could see that the last UAV, they hit them and they secure it. In the Red Sea, I think that it's a more complicated issue. And if you would ask me, what is the next issue that the Israeli Navy should consider from a strategic point of view, not only the Israeli Navy, but Israel, is how we can secure sea line of communication, since our trade with the Far East is growing and growing all the time. Another
Indeed.
point is considering the Strait of Tiran. I don't know if you understand that in this time, Egypt transferred the Tiran island to the Saudis. And the Saudis asked the UN inspector who were responsible to secure it for free passage to leave the area. The relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia is only in a turning point that we should consider what will happen there. So, from my perspective, I think that the Israeli Navy and Israel as a state should consider from a strategic point what is the role of the Red Sea in its strategy.
I just wanted to mention that when the transfer or the return of Tiran and Sanafir islands to Saudi Arabia, which gave them to the Egyptians in the wake of the 48 war, so that they could maintain a siege of Israel. When the Saudis negotiated with the Egyptians the return of the islands, they undertook vis-a-vis the United States through channels to sustain all of Egypt's obligations as to free trade in the Straits. So it should be expected, although, of course, things can happen even in Saudi Arabia, but at least there's a basis for the expectation that they will sustain it. And more generally, Saudi and UAE interests cohere with those of Israel and the United States in terms of the balance of naval power in the entire region.
Indeed.
In this particular case, I don't agree with Iran because the freedom of navigation through the Strait of Tiran is mentioned in the peace agreement between us and Egypt, and it is governing the UNCLOS. The Saudi Arabia put it explicitly that they are not taking the obligation as the Egyptian, and that's what is concerned me, and I think that we should take it in consideration what will happen there. They don't have the same obligation as it's mentioned in the peace agreement with Egypt. They say that they have no reservation for it, and they are loyal only to the UNCLOS about what is transiting passage and so and so.
We take success for granted. When the State of Israel was founded, there were fears that there can be an invasion, especially by the Egyptians, because Israel, of course, has borders with 4 Arab countries: Egypt, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. But the West Coast was completely open to invasions, and the memory of World War II was still fresh. There was no invasion. Also, one of the greatest fears had to do with food stocks and other strategic materiel in Israel, because the fear was of a long war when the merchant marine will be attacked by submarines or surface vessels. Again, this has not materialized. Also, between 1956 and the revolution in Iran, Iranian oil flowed through Eilat to Israeli refineries, and they're from either to the Israeli market or to the global market. All of that was protected by the Israeli Navy, either by deterrence or by presence. So we should also note that when we don't hear of attacks or mishaps, this is also a success.
With that being said, of course, when we look on the southern front, and with regard to what you mentioned, Admiral, I think it's quite obvious that at this stage, Saudi Arabia, even though not explicit on its intentions vis-a-vis Tiran and Sanapir, it will maintain, at least from what I see and the communications I had in that direction, they will maintain freedom of navigation for Israel and anybody else transiting through those waters. And I'm more concerned regarding the southern part of that equation, which is Yemen, where Iran remains supreme, and the Houthis, together with its alliance of tribes, has managed to attain quite a significant weaponry, whether it is ballistic missiles or other surface-to-shore missiles, which may also prove challenging to various assets traveling, not only civilian commercial lines, but also military vessels transiting there. The contingency that should be planned by Israel is obviously a legitimate equation in order to ensure the freedom of maritime navigation there. But at the same time, we do see the United Kingdom very active in those waters. We see the United States very active in those waters. We just had the joint exercise between Italy, France, and the United States that saw the quite impressive maneuver. Of course, that came in order to provide some sort of contrast to that of, or contra to the one executed by the Russians, Chinese, and Iranians. But to what degree do you see the complexity of the maritime navigations going even further, one step beyond that, considering the strategic waterway also transiting roughly between 1/4 and 1/3 of world's energy supplies, going again from the Persian Gulf all the way to Europe and beyond?
You're right. I think that you mentioned, and that's what I tried to mention about the Yom Kippur War. And the Red Sea is a very complicated arena to operate there. And when we are speaking about there is the diplomacy function of the Navy. Yes, the Israeli Navy is doing some exercise with the Fifth Fleet, but we can't ignore that from 2019 till February 2023, 6 related merchant ships were attacked by Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So they identified that if they have to revenge against our operation in Syria, in other places, they identified this arena that they can operate. I think that the Sixth Fleet is not, let's say, it's not deterring the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. So it's become more complicated, because if we can rely on the Fifth Fleet for freedom of navigation, it could be nice. But you see what is the action of the Fifth Fleet when the Iranian Revolutionary Guard are taking some of their surveillance autonomous vessel towed them, and what is the reaction? So that's the reason that I am saying that the Israeli Navy, Israel by itself, should consider what strategy it has to do with this arena of the Red Sea, not only the Red Sea, the Gulf of Aden, the Arabian Sea. If you examine what were the attacks that occurred there, it was not in the Persian Gulf. It was far beyond it. It's about 300 kilometers off Oman. So how to secure this sea line of communication, even though it was not an Israeli that are under Israel flag or are in Israel. But it's caused us a problem, and I think that from strategic point of view, we should consider what to do.
Dr. Lerman?
Clearly, in the northern parts of the Gulf of Aden, much will depend on Israel's ability to cooperate also with the UAE, because they have struck an alliance with the southern tribal elements of Yemen, and they indirectly influence, if not control, this area and the island of Socotra, which is potentially a key strategic asset in that region. And as much as we can maintain and enhance cooperation with the UAE, and there are complicated relations between them and the Saudis over the Yemeni situation, but ultimately the Saudis have the same set of interests. as long as we can, as much as we can, expand this, as I said, under the wings or the aegis of the American presence, NAVCENT. I think this is the key to our ability to deliver on the points that Charles mentioned.
Indeed. Mr. Oren?
Well, the Israeli Defense Forces has a from the sea doctrine in which should another war with Hezbollah erupt and Israel will see fit to invade southern Lebanon, the ground forces as well as the Air Force will be helped on their western flank by the Navy operating out of Haifa with a lot of firepower and perhaps other activities. So cooperation between the various branches of the IDF has greatly improved over the last decade or so.
Indeed. Well, taking, of course, into account that the Navy is small, it needs to clearly coordinate what assets to put where and to ensure that it is able to secure ultimately.
But because of connectivity and improvements in electronics in general, the fiery unit can come from the sea as well as from artillery, armor, and obviously air.
Indeed. Nevertheless, its main goal is to secure Israel's economic waters, which is obviously vital for the strategic interests of the State of Israel. But this is all the time that we have for today. I'd like to thank Admiral Chorev, Dr. Lerman, and Mr. Oren for being part of today's panel. I'd like to thank all of you who watched today's episode from home. And until next time, shalom.